All right, well, from the big storm, we're going to pivot to the other big story today, the mayhem in Minnesota. For more on this, joining me now is someone hoping to bring a better change for the state and the people of Minnesota. He is running as a Republican to flip one of the two blue seats in the U.S. Senate. Adam Schwartz joining me now. Adam, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly.
Schwartz, yeah, thanks for having me on, Tracy.
Schwarzy, okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for correcting me. You're also a Navy SEAL, so thank you for your service, sir. I want to get your perspective on everything that's been unfolding in Minneapolis. You know, not just the shootings, but also the widespread fraud that is taking place in the state.
Well, thanks, Tracy. That's kind of the genesis of the shooting, is where now what we're seeing is Walz and Flanagan try to avoid talking about the fraud, and instead of having a mea culpa for the responsibility of frauding American taxpayers, because the majority of that fraud was through federal dollars on the scale of $9 to over $19 billion, their rhetoric is creating this sideshow circus to distract Americans from the true failed leadership record of the Walz-Flanagan administration. It's really sad now because their rhetoric, their violent rhetoric, we're having these tragedies in the streets. And by the way, that's not how the majority of Minnesotans feel. The microcosm of the national networks paying attention to Minneapolis. I've been running for U.S. Senate for almost a year now. I've been all around greater Minnesota. Minnesotans support the law and rule of order, and we support the President Trump administration and what they're doing to take violent criminals outside of our streets and restore public safety again. And that's something the Walz and Flanagan administration has completely avoided throughout their time in office. It's something the Biden administration, allowed to happen when they allowed 15 to 21 illegal people that do border crossings. And by the way, we're down to 0 now under this administration. So Minnesotans actually support the rule of law.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that next, Adam. I mean, because we're hearing all these other voices on the left and all the violence going on. So, of course, they get really the focus here. And that unrest is ramping up following the shooting of Alex Pretty. What about your campaign? How are you hoping to bring Minnesota out of these dark and difficult times?
That's great. And really, this is a call to action for leaders to step up, right? This is the time where leaders are made. They show themselves. And when Walz says statements like this morning, law enforcement, they're not actually law enforcement. ICE is not a law enforcement apparatus. Well, no, Governor, they actually are law enforcement. They're providing the gap in coverage that you failed. They're providing the gap in coverage that Mayor Jacob Frate refused to do when he pulled law enforcement from the streets. And so we're talking about why we have thousands of federal law enforcement now in our streets. It's because not only did the administration go in to pull out violent criminals from their streets and our communities, but what the response was from Walz and Jacob Frate, Minneapolis. They pulled back all the support from local law enforcement. And that's a real tragedy because as somebody who's been on the front lines, served in all these really complex urban operating environments, ICE is not supposed to provide their own security, their own outer and inner cordon for these operations. They're supposed to get the bad guys and get them off our streets. And so now when they're trying to provide security for their own entities against thousands of protesters that are throwing rocks, throwing ice, mistakes can happen. And if there was a mistake in this instance, I support the Constitution and I support the rule of law. And both of those things happen at the same time. Unfortunately, the Democrats support neither.
Yeah. Before I let you go, real quick, I want to talk about this ad that you have for your campaign. You're coming out of a frozen lake. I mean, that's really one way to separate yourself. How else do you intend to separate your campaign ahead of a potential primary?
Well, leadership is doing the hard things, and leadership is not easy. We need leaders to enter this race, and we need leaders in our office, our federal offices. You look at the deficit spending on both sides of the aisle, and you look at just what the Walz-Flanagan record. We've got $19 billion. Can you imagine if we promoted Peggy Flanagan now to the U.S. Senate, where she has access to trillions of taxpayer dollars? The contrast cannot be higher. Somebody who loves America, has been on the front lines fighting for our great country that provided me life through adoption, supporting our American first foreign policies my life. Or you're going to have Peggy Flanagan, who's running right now as an open socialist. The contrast cannot be higher, and the stakes cannot be higher for Minnesota and the United States of America.
Well, Adam Schwartz, he is candidate for U.S. Senate to represent Minnesota, also former Navy SEAL. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. God bless you, Tracy.